If I can get on? All right. All right. Good morning, everyone. Good to see all of you. I hope all of you had a good week. I want to thank you for starting your week off with us. That includes all of you who are listening on Facebook or on our web page. Thank you so much for worshiping with us today. I have to start out by saying that I'm really not prepared for today's sermon, and it's my fault. So I'm going to do something that I hardly ever do. I'm going to try to wing it, okay? And that's my fault. It's not fair to you, but that's where we are today. But we're going to be in Hebrews chapter 12. Hebrews chapter 12. Go ahead and make your way there. We're going to start reading in verse 3. How many of you have ever seen the commercial on TV where it has all these dogs? I think it may have one or two cats in it, but it's mainly dogs. And the dogs have been mistreated. They haven't been fed properly. They haven't been taken care of. They've been left out in the cold. They're shivering. You know the commercial I'm talking about? Yeah. The thing about that commercial is it's very long, right? It's like 10 minutes long. Because every time it comes on, Jennifer, if she has the remote, she switches it. Or if I have the remote, she says, yeah, switch it. I don't want to see it, right? And so we wait about 5 minutes or so, and we switch it back, and there's the dogs, right? And so it's designed to tug on your heartstrings, right? It really is. They're playing soft music in the background, and it's just a kind of a sad commercial. Jennifer hates it. She cannot stand it. Me, doesn't bother me so much because I'm a realist. I really am. I know how things really are. I know that we live in a sinful world, and I know that people are going to be sinful. It may sound awful, but I don't expect a whole lot out of people. I really don't. I know that people are going to be sinful. But Jennifer, she doesn't like to see things like that. She doesn't like to hear bad things. She likes happy things. You know what I mean? She really, really loves happy things, and that's just the way she is. She has such a tender heart. Even some movies that we watch, and oh, by the way, she loves Hallmark movies, because Hallmark movies there's nothing bad in them, right? I mean, there's nothing bad in them. But even some other movies we may watch, she likes some parts of it, but she doesn't like all the parts. And so when it comes to something she perceives to be bad, she'll leave the room and then she'll come back. But the problem is, since she doesn't watch all of the movies, the bad parts, things that she perceives to be bad, she doesn't know the whole story, right? She doesn't know the whole story. She likes happy things. And I knew I was going to be preaching this text today, and I got to thinking, that's exactly how we are as evangelicals, right? When it comes to God. We love the happy parts. I mean, we love the happy parts, don't we? We love that God is gracious, that God is loving, that God is about restoration, that He's about healing. We love those things, right? I mean, we eat them up, and we come to church wanting to hear about those things, don't we? And the churches that just keep on the happy things, they're the most popular churches, aren't they? I mean, they really are. That's why Joel Osteen has like 15,000 members in his church, because he just focuses on the happy things, and we love it. We eat those things up. But when it comes to other attributes of God that may not be so happy, or we don't perceive them as happy, we struggle with those, right? I mean, we really do. We have been conditioned, either on purpose or by accident. I think on purpose. I'm just saying by accident to leave a little bit of room open, but I think on purpose, we've been conditioned to view God incompletely. We really have. It is no small chance that the most popular books among evangelicals have always been books about God prospering us or God taking us out of harm's way. All you have to do is research. You know, the most popular books, the best-selling books among evangelicals have always been books like that. Why? Because we eat it up. We love it. But again, we struggle with the other parts that we read in the Bible that may not be so happy, right? I am committed to preaching through books of the Bible. I believe this is the way every pastor should preach. I just believe that. I get if you're, a guest speaker or something like that, you just can't do that. But I think every pastor should just preach through books of the Bible. You start, at the beginning of the book and almost go verse by verse. This is what I believe. I'm very aware that it's not the most popular type of preaching. I get that. Topical preaching and sermon series preaching is much more popular. And the reason why is because the focus is really on who? You. Right? I mean, it really is. You pick a topic that appeals to us, and then you try to find scripture to fit into that topic, right? But if you preach through books of the Bible, what's the starting point? God. Okay? The reason I tell you all this is because the thing about preaching through books of the Bible is when you get to some hard parts, you can't just stop. I can't just say, I'm going to preach through the book of Hebrews, but not all of it. Because the text we're going to be in today is really one of the hardest texts in the Bible. It really is. And if you read the Bible all the way through, there are going to be a lot of things that you have to wrestle with. I mean, there really is. And chapter 12 of Hebrews is one of them. But you have to decide, do I want all of God, or do I just want the happy parts, right? I mean, you really have to wrestle with a lot of things. And the reason I say that most professing Christians view God incompletely is because they haven't read the whole book. If you read the whole book, my goodness, there are some things that you just scratch your head about, right? And it's not like God's changed any, right? It's not like, I've heard people say, well, the God of the Old Testament is mean, the God of the New Testament, he kind of chilled out a lot, right? That's not right. You got to wrestle with these things. Jennifer and I had a young man live with us for a little while. His name was Adrian. I loved that boy. I still love him. He came out not too long ago as homosexual. Broke my heart. Just broke my heart. But anyway, he lived with us for a little while because he came from a broken home. His mother wanted to be his best friend instead of his mother, which is the worst thing that you can possibly do. Okay? He wanted some discipline in his life, and he definitely knew that he was going to get that from me. And so he lived with us, and I was working for the Family Foundation during that time. I was up in Frankfurt a lot, and so he couldn't help me. I wasn't doing any kind of construction work. And so, the only thing he could do was chores around the house. And I told him, I said, okay, I'm going to put you on a reading plan for the Bible. You have all this time. And he read the Bible for like 3 or 4 hours a day. Okay? Now, when you read the Bible for 3 or 4 hours a day, you're going to get through it pretty quickly. Actually, you can get through it in about 3 months. Okay? You may not know that. But he did, and I gave him a notebook, and I told him, I said, I want you to write down all the things that you have questions about. And I said, there's going to be some things in here, if you're paying attention, that, you're going to have some questions about, right? And he did. And so he came to me, and he said, Don, I hate to say this, but I got a problem with the God of this book. He said, it's not the same God that I've heard in church or that I've heard other people talk about. And I said, he's usually not, okay? I said, what do you got a problem with? Okay, so he started when God told Moses that he raised up Pharaoh for the sole purpose of destroying Pharaoh, right? You remember that part? I mean, God just basically said to Moses, I allowed Pharaoh to be born so that I could destroy him, okay? He had a problem when the children of Israel entered into the land of Canaan. Remember, they had to take the land? And he had a problem when God told the children of Israel to go into certain places and kill all the men, women, and children, right? So, let's get this straight. There were infants that they had to kill. They were 5 years old. They were 6 years old. And God told them, go kill them all. Had a problem with that. He had a problem with God killing David's son because of his sin with Uriah, right? Had a problem with God killing 70,000 people because David numbered the people. Remember that one? He had a problem with God giving people diseases. Because if you read the Old Testament, he does that with several people. God just gives them a disease. Had a problem when Jesus said that if you want to be my disciple, you have to forsake the people that you love the most in this world. Had a problem in Romans chapter 9, which most people have a problem with this, but he had a problem in Romans chapter 9 where God was talking about Jacob and Esau, and he said before they were even born, God said, I love Jacob, but I hated Esau. And so he told me all these things. He read all those things, and he said, what about this? As though I could spin it some way, right? And I said, I can't spin it. This is God. This is God. You either have to accept him, or you're going to struggle, or you have to walk away, right? Those are the only options, because there's no way you can spin those things. There's no way. And I told him this. I read this somewhere. Can't remember. But I told him this. We must not think that God does what is good and right, but everything God does is good and right. You know what I mean? We don't get to define what's good and right, do we? God does. And so I told him, I said, you have all these instances you gave me here. We have to believe in some way that they're good and right. Why? Because God did them. Because God did them, right? We have to know the complete God, right? Not just the happy parts. And we're going to get into a text today that I think will surprise a whole lot of people, okay? So we're going to start reading in verse 3 because we went through verses 1 and 2 last week. I'm reading from the New Living Translation, but you follow along with whatever translation you may have. Verse 3. It says, think of all the hostility he endured. Now, who is he? Huh? Jesus, right? That's what the writer's been writing about for the last 11 chapters. Think of all the hostility he endured from sinful people. Then you won't become weary and give up. So if you remember when we started the book of Hebrews, and I do this before we get into any book, I spend a lot of time telling you the circumstances of the book, right? A lot of time. And I know some of you are like, oh, here he goes again. He's telling us all these technical things, but they're important. They're vital, the who, when, why, and where, before you even start. And I told you that the writer of Hebrews, probably the Apostle Paul, maybe, I'll find out when I get to heaven, but the writer of Hebrews is writing to a group of Jews. We know that for a fact, who just converted to Christianity from Judaism. And they were having a really hard time. It wasn't a good time to be a Christian, especially a Jewish Christian, right? Because what was happening, they were having their possessions taken away from them. They were having their homes taken away from them. They were having the right to buy and sell taken away from them. Most Jewish families, they lived in a single home, and there were like 3 generations in one family, right? That's the way it was. And so if you were a Jew and you converted to Christianity, your other family would shun you. They would kick you out. If you owned a business, no one would buy anything from you. Even if you didn't own a business, you couldn't buy anything from anybody else, so you really had to move, right? And so that's what was going on. Now, for 11 chapters, God has not addressed their pain and suffering. God has not addressed this at all. But here in chapter 12, he's going to address it. And it's what he has to say about it that's off most of our radars, okay? But when he says, think about all the hostility he endured from sinful people, then you won't become weary and give up. He's saying to these Jewish Christians, you need to remember Jesus went through the same hostility. That's what he's saying here, okay? Verse 4. It says, after all, you have not yet given your lives in your struggle against sin. After all, you have not yet given your lives in your struggle against sin. So this goes along with verse 3, right? Here's what he's saying. He's saying to these Jewish Christians, you have it bad. That's what he's saying. You have it bad. Sinful men and women are trying to harm you. And you have it bad. No one is saying that you don't have it bad, but you don't have it as bad as Jesus did. That's exactly what he's saying here. Okay? You have it bad, and I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry this has happened to you, but you don't have it as bad as Jesus did, or even the people in chapter 11. Remember? We went through chapter 11, all of those names. Some of those people were sawn in half. Some of those people were tortured. They were lit on fire. And so the writer of Hebrews is saying, I'm so sorry you're going through this, but, right? But you don't have it as bad as Jesus. Now, here's where this thing is about to get a little crazy. And I know it is. I know it's off most people's radars because you can't preach this text and grow a church. You just can't. You can't preach this text and have an altar call where everybody wants to rush to the altar and say, I want this God. Okay? So let's look at it again. It says, after all, you have not yet given your lives in your struggle against sin, and have you forgotten the encouraging words God spoke to you as his children? He said, my child, don't make light of the Lord's discipline. Now, that word discipline there, you need to think of training, okay? And don't give up when he corrects you. For the Lord disciplines those he loves, and he punishes. Now, some translations probably say scourges. Does anyone's translation say scourges? Yeah. Same thing. And he punishes each one he accepts as a child. Now, let me tell you why this is off most of our charts here. The text just said that all the pain and suffering that these Jews were going through, and remember, it wasn't of their own making, was it? Most of the troubles we have come from who? Us, right? The biggest problem I've always had in my life is me. And so most of our problems come from us, but these people that the writer of Hebrews is writing to, they're being harmed by sinful people. But the text just got through saying that ultimately all of that is from who? God. Ooh. Does anybody else have a problem with that? Right? And so I think about that and I start to thinking, why? You know, why is God doing this? Why is God playing it this way? Well, fortunately, he tells us. Let's go back to verse 6. For the Lord disciplines those he loves. I want you to say that with me. For the Lord disciplines those he loves. One more time. For the Lord disciplines those he loves, and he punishes each one he accepts as a child. So we're starting to get a little clarity right here, right? For the Lord disciplines those he loves. For the Lord disciplines those he trains, and he punishes those he calls his own children. So we're starting to get a little clarity there. Let's continue. As you endure this divine discipline, remember that the Lord is treating you as his own children. Who ever heard of a child who is never disciplined by its father. If God doesn't discipline you as he does all his children, it means you are illegitimate and are not really his children at all. Since we respected our earthly fathers who disciplined us, shouldn't we submit even more to the discipline of the Father of our spirits and live forever? For our earthly fathers disciplined us for a few years, doing the best they knew how. But listen to this. But God's discipline is always good for us, so that we might share in his what? Holiness. Two things I see here. And I get, some of you may say, I don't have a right to talk about this because I don't have children. Well, I'm going to talk about it anyway. Somewhere along the way, parents have decided that being their child's friend is more important than being their parent. I don't know when that happened. I think it started with my generation, the Gen X's, right? What do they call them? Helicopter parents? You ever heard that term? And I get it. I really get that you probably want your children to like you, right? I kind of get that. Jennifer and I don't have kids. The closest thing that we have ever had was Lamarck. And I remember when it looked like he was going to be able to come. Because there for a while it was up in the air in Haiti, like other countries. It's so fluid, things change. But when I knew it was going to happen, I took a quick trip to Haiti to talk to his parents, Marcelin and Lucia. And I looked at them directly, and I wanted to know from them, how is it do you want me to treat your son? What is our role? And they said, you're his daddy, and Jennifer is his mother. I want you to treat him like he is your son. And I get it. I want Lamarck to like me. I want him to think I'm cool, that we're buds. But God's call on my life is not to be his friend, but to train him in a godly way so that he will grow up to be a godly man. And a lot of times, that means I have to be the bad guy. A lot of times, that means I have to inflict pain, not physical pain, but pain. If he was younger, I don't have a problem with whipping and things like that. I don't. I make fun of the timeout thing only because I didn't have timeout when I was a kid, right? Timeout when I was a kid was your father knocking you out, okay? That was timeout when I was a kid. I would have loved, go to the corner and think about what you did. I'm like, okay, yeah, I'll do that all day long. But the point that I'm trying to make is what the writer of Hebrews is saying. God loves us so very much that he's willing to inflict pain on us. That's how much he loves us, right? Do you see that here? That's how much he loves us. Another thing is, it says, but God's discipline is always good for us so that we might share in his holiness. In his holiness. There's just something about, when we take it the right way, there's just something about pain and suffering that draws us closer to Jesus, right? I mean, it really does. There's just something about going through things that when you take it the correct way, you just draw so close to Jesus. Have any of you ever experienced that? But we have to take it the right way, right? We can't buck at it. Look at what it says in verse 11. I like this one because it says, no discipline is enjoyable while it's happening. It's painful. I like that because the text is giving us permission not to like it, right? I mean, that's what the text is doing. It's giving us permission not to like the discipline and the pain and suffering. Because I think there's this erroneous idea among Christians, and I've seen it all my life, that, if you're going through a bad time, you have to be happy about it. Have you ever seen that among Christians? I don't know where that came from. Because it's not biblical, because the text right here, it's saying you don't have to like it. You don't have to like it. I've seen people at funeral homes, and listen, bless her heart, Ellen's friend, she was keeping it all in. She was saying, I'm fine, when she wasn't fine. The worst thing you can do, if you're falling apart on the inside, you need to be falling apart on the outside too, right? So people will know. It's not always chipper. When people die, it hurts. When loved ones walk out, it hurts, right? And so I love this text because it's given us permission not to like all of this discipline that we're going through. Go down to verse 14. It says, work at living in peace with everyone and work at living a holy life, for those who are not holy will not see the Lord. Look after each other so that none of you fails to receive the grace of God. Watch out that no poisonous root of bitterness, pay attention to that word, grows up to you to trouble you, corrupting many. Make sure that no one is immoral or godless like Esau, who traded his birthright as the firstborn for a single meal. Now, you know the story about that? You remember the story of Esau and Jacob? Yeah, Esau treated his blessing from God as the firstborn son lightly, right? He came in from the field. He was starving to death. And he gave up his whole birthright of his blessing to feed his stomach, right? And here's the thing. Here's the thing that I've seen that can really happen when God is training us, disciplining us, or punishing us. If we don't take it correctly, if we don't take it for what it is, there are several things that can happen, right? There really is. One of the things that can happen is we can have a sinful outlet to try to get past the difficulties in life. Do you know what I mean? We will use our difficulties, we will use our difficulties to sin, right? I can't tell you how many men blame their porn addiction on their wives. Seriously, I've talked to these men. Well, my wife's not affectionate to me. What else can I do, right? This happens all the time. Or another way is, my life stinks, my life is falling apart, so I'm going to go get drunk. It happens all the time. It happens all the time. You see, when we don't understand that everything comes from God, and that the pain that He is inflicting on us is out of pure love for us, we can run to one of those places, right? Another thing we can do is we can become bitter, right? That's the worst thing that can happen to a person. How many of you have known bitter people? They're not fun to be around, are they? I mean, they're not. Bitterness can eat you from the inside out. Yeah, it really can. Because you're just looking for some happy event to try to ruin, right? I mean, that's what bitter people do. They suck the life right out of a room, don't they? And the thing about bitter people is, after a while, you will lose all your friends, and the only friends you have left are bitter friends, right? Because misery loves company. Because no one wants to be around bitter people, right? And so if we don't watch it, we can fall into one of these traps when our life is falling apart. If we don't understand that this is coming from a loving God who loves us so much that He won't let us decide what's good for us, right? That's how much He loves us. He won't let us decide what's good for us. And so He will step in and He will afflict pain and suffering because He loves us. But if we don't understand that, we can run from it, right? We can run from it, And we can take the thing that God is using to draw us close, and we can use it as a weapon to run away from Him, right? You see, these things that God inflicts on us, they're meant to draw us close to Him. They're meant to draw us close to Him, but if we don't watch it, we will use them to push Him further away. Let's finish up. Verse 18. It says, "You have not come to a physical mountain, to a place of flaming fire, darkness, gloom, and whirlwind, as the Israelites did on Mount Sinai. For they heard an awesome trumpet blast and a voice so terrible that they begged God to stop speaking. They staggered back under God's command. If even an animal touches the mountain, it must be stoned to death. Moses himself was so frightened at the sight that he said, 'I am terrified and trembling.' No, you have come to Mount Zion, to the city of the living God, the heavenly Jerusalem, and to the countless thousands of angels in a joyful gathering. You have come to the assembly of God's firstborn children, whose names are written in heaven. You have come to God Himself." Now, real quick, if you remember back when God led the children of Israel to Mount Sinai, He made a covenant with them. And God tried to speak to the people, and it was a flaming fire, and there was smoke, and the people were scared, right? They were scared to death. And they went to Moses and they said, "Listen, yeah, we want the benefits of God, but don't let Him speak to us. It scares us half to death. Don't let Him speak to us. We want you to speak to God, Moses, and let God speak to you, and then, Moses, you speak to us, but don't let God speak to us." Isn't that amazing? Because today, there's so many people who said, "I wish God would speak to me," but back then, there was like, I don't want to talk to Him, right? I mean, that's what they were saying. I don't want to talk to Him. And so the writer of Hebrews is saying these people were afraid of God, right? They were scared to death of God. Now, we need to have a healthy fear of God, right? But what the writer of Hebrews is saying is, listen, you're not on Mount Sinai anymore. You're not on Mount Sinai. That's not the way God wants you to approach Him. He wants you to come to Him, knowing that the pain and the suffering that you're going through is from a loving God so that we can approach Him, right? Again, we don't have any kids, so the only thing I can use as an illustration is Jennifer, and she hates this when I do this, but when I sit next to Jennifer and I put my arm around her, she doesn't flinch. She doesn't. She doesn't flinch because she's not scared of me. Now, she's seen sides of me to where I've kind of blown up before, and even during those times, I was just so ashamed of myself. But she's not scared of me. She doesn't think that if something doesn't go my way, I'm just going to blow up and start hitting things. That's not the way she is, and I'm so thankful for that. And if we had kids, I wouldn't want them to be scared of me in that way. The writer of Hebrews is really saying the same thing. When he talks about Mount Sinai, the people were scared to death of God. That if they were tiptoeing around God, and if they did something wrong, God was going to zap them, right? And the writer of Hebrews is saying that's not the way God is. So we shouldn't think if we have a bad month or a bad day that God is inflicting this pain on us because He's mad at us. That's not the way God works. He may be inflicting discipline and training on us because, what? He loves us. He loves us. You know, I know this is difficult. I really do. But if you've read most of the Bible, this shouldn't surprise you. It really shouldn't surprise you. The biggest comforting thing to me about this side of God, He loves me too much to let me get too far out there. You know what I mean? He will inflict pain and suffering on me to bring me back. He's done that. He's done that many times. My car accident. Before my car accident, I had major plans. Big plans. I was at a big church. I had really big plans. I had felt God telling me all along, don't do it. But I did it anyway. God changed my plans. I know for a fact that car accident came from the hand of God. A lot of people don't like to think of God that way, but I know for a fact it came from the hand of God. God got me back in a position to where He wanted me to be. And I love that about God. He loves me so much that He won't leave me alone. Same thing for you. So I guess what I'm saying is, things don't happen by accident, do they? They really don't happen by accident. Jesus said a bird can't fall to the ground without your Father willing it. Don't you think He's a little bit more concerned about you than birds? Right? And so what I love about our loving, gracious God, He loves me so much, He loves you so much to where when you get too far out there, He will bring you back. J.I. Packer, probably my favorite author besides God, he says, God brings His children suffering and pain and joy so that they don't get too tied up in the world. I love that, right? I love that. But again, these things are hard to swallow because if you turn on the TV, and I would say that if you went to 50% of Protestant churches, you're not going to hear about this God, but it is God. And to me, that makes me love Him even more, right? It really does. Let's pray.